The next phase of a devastating conflict is about to unfold, and the implications could reshape the entire Middle East forever. Just 2 hours ago, Israeli Defense Forces announced they've initiated what they're calling preliminary actions for a comprehensive ground operation aimed at seizing complete control over Gaza City. But here's where it gets controversial. This isn't just another military maneuver. It's a full-scale plan to occupy one of the most densely populated urban areas in the world. According to military spokesperson Brigadier General Efi Defrin, Israeli forces have already established positions around Gaza City's perimeter and are actively conducting operations in 2 critical neighborhoods, Zaytun and Jabalia. These aren't random locations. They're strategic entry points that will serve as launching pads for what Defense Minister Israel Katz approved just this Tuesday. To put this operation into perspective for those unfamiliar with the scale we're discussing, Israel is mobilizing approximately 60,000 reserve troops, specifically for early September deployment. This massive personnel shift will allow regular active duty soldiers to focus entirely on the Gaza City operation, which still requires approval from the Security Cabinet later this week. But here's the part most people miss. Hamas has fired back with serious accusations, claiming through Reuters that Israel is deliberately sabotaging ceasefire negotiations in favor of what they call a brutal war against innocent civilians. This statement raises critical questions about whether diplomatic solutions are being genuinely pursued or strategically avoided. The human cost of this escalation cannot be understated. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinian civilians currently residing in Gaza City will likely receive evacuation orders, forcing them to seek shelter in southern Gaza as preparations for Israel's takeover intensify. Think about that for a moment. Entire neighborhoods of families being told to abandon their homes with potentially nowhere safe to go. International reaction has been swift and largely critical. French President Emmanuel Macron didn't mince words on Wednesday, declaring that Israel's plan can only lead to disaster for both peoples and risks plunging the entire region into a cycle of permanent war. That's diplomatic language for what could be described as a warning about potential catastrophic consequences. And this is where the situation becomes even more complex. The International Committee of the Red Cross has issued stark warnings that increased military activity and further displacement of civilians risk worsening an already catastrophic situation for Gaza's 2.1 million residents. Consider the mathematics here. 2.1 million people in one of the world's most densely populated territories, with limited escape routes and resources. The current military escalation stems from the collapse of indirect ceasefire negotiations between Israel and Hamas last month. Following those failed talks, Israel's government formally announced its intention to capture the entire Gaza Strip, a decision that transforms this from a limited operation into a comprehensive territorial conquest. During Wednesday's televised briefing, Brigadier General Defrin painted a picture of Hamas as battered and bruised, after enduring 22 months of continuous warfare. His stated objective goes beyond simple military victory. We will deepen the damage to Hamas in Gaza City, a stronghold of governmental and military terror for the terrorist organization, he explained, adding plans to deepen the damage to the terror infrastructure above and below the ground and sever the population's dependence on Hamas. But Defrin also revealed something significant. Israeli forces aren't waiting for official cabinet approval to begin. We have begun the preliminary actions, and already now, IDF troops are holding the outskirts of Gaza City, he stated. 2 military brigades are currently operating in Zaytun, where they recently discovered underground tunnels containing weapons, while a 3rd brigade has deployed to Jabalia. The civilian protection aspect adds another layer of controversy to this operation. While Israeli officials claim they're taking measures to minimize harm to civilians by providing evacuation warnings, critics question whether such warnings are adequate given the limited safe zones available. Mahmoud Bassal, a spokesperson for Gaza's Hamas-controlled civil defense agency, described conditions in Zaytun and Sabra neighborhoods as very dangerous and unbearable on Tuesday. Wednesday's casualty reports from the agency indicate that Israeli strikes killed 25 people across the territory, including a family of 5, 3 children and their parents, whose home in the Bada area of Shati refugee camp was bombed. The hostage situation complicates military planning significantly. Approximately 50 hostages remain in Hamas custody within Gaza, with intelligence suggesting only 20 are still alive. Families of these hostages have expressed grave concerns that a ground offensive in Gaza City could endanger their loved ones' lives. Defrin acknowledged this challenge, stating that the IDF is doing everything possible to prevent harm to the hostages. But critics argue that intensive military operations inherently increase risks to captives. The International Committee of the Red Cross has issued perhaps the most sobering assessment of what intensified military operations could mean. After months of relentless hostilities and repeated displacement, the people in Gaza are utterly exhausted. What they need is not more pressure, but relief. Not more fear, but a chance to breathe. Their statement continued with specific humanitarian requirements. They must have access to the essentials to live in dignity: food, medical and hygiene supplies, clean water and safe shelter. The ICRC warned that any further intensification of military operations will only deepen the suffering, tear more families apart, and threaten an irreversible humanitarian crisis. Diplomatic efforts continue despite the military escalation. Qatar and Egypt, serving as mediators, have presented a new proposal featuring a 60-day ceasefire and the release of approximately half the remaining hostages. Hamas announced Monday that it had accepted this proposal, but Israel's response reveals the complexity of negotiations. Israeli officials stated Tuesday that they would no longer accept partial agreements, demanding instead a comprehensive deal ensuring all hostages release. This position shift represents a significant hardening of Israel's negotiating stance, potentially making diplomatic resolution more difficult. Hamas responded Wednesday by accusing Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of deliberately disregarding mediator proposals, calling him the real obstructionist of any agreement, in a statement reported by Reuters. This exchange illustrates how each side views the other as the primary barrier to peaceful resolution. The broader context of this conflict traces back to October 7, 2023, when Hamas launched a coordinated attack on southern Israel, killing approximately 1,200 people and taking 251 hostages. Israel's military response has continued for nearly 2 years, with Gaza's health ministry reporting at least 62,122 Palestinian deaths during this period. The United Nations and other international organizations cite these ministry figures as the most reliable casualty statistics available. As this situation develops, critical questions emerge about proportionality, civilian protection, and long-term regional stability. The international community faces difficult decisions about how to respond to what some view as necessary security measures and others condemn as disproportionate military action. What strikes you as the most concerning aspect of this escalation? The immediate humanitarian crisis, the potential for regional war, or the apparent breakdown of diplomatic solutions? And here's the question that might divide opinion. Can military occupation of Gaza City achieve lasting security for Israel? Or will it create conditions for perpetual conflict that endangers both Israeli and Palestinian civilians for generations to come? Share your perspective. Do you believe this military strategy will ultimately bring peace to the region? Or are we witnessing the beginning of an even more devastating chapter in this long-standing conflict.